Is that better? Hello, we're Todd and Morgan Trethowan. Okay, sorry. What did I say after that? Hello, we're Todd and Morgan from Trethowan Brothers, and we've made this short film specially for cheesemongers. There's no frills, drone shots or slow-mo, just a typical day in the dairy. And we hope you find it useful or at least interesting. It's the other way around, we hope you find it interesting. We've been making cheese 25 years, initially with Gore with Cilli and later with Pitchfork Cheddar. And our dairy is 5 miles from the town of Cheddar in the heart of Somerset.
Whoa, what have I just put in?
Today we're going to be making Pitchfork, but before we take a look at that, let's go and look at the cows. Oh yeah, we're going to go and look at the cows, aren't we? Oh, dear God! We use the milk unpasteurised because it's very, very clean. And the cow's rations are made up of 92% forage and grass, which is all grown on the farm. We're very fortunate to have a short pipe that takes the milk directly from the parlour to our dairy, using gravity rather than being pumped. And we can tell you why that's so important to us when we go back inside.
Happy cows make good milk, make good cheese.
So now we're in the dairy, and this is the pipe that the milk comes through. And as we mentioned, it is gravity fed, which means it's not pumped. And that's good because you don't get something called shearing. So when milk is pumped under pressure, you can damage the structure of the milk. And that's important to us, especially for the Cilli, because it's easier for the Cilli texture to flip over into something more boring. And there's a few things we take super care with to keep it more interesting.
Okay, so here we are doing the cut. We've set the curd using a traditional animal rennet, so now we're cutting it. So to separate the curds and the whey. The cut is really important because it regulates how much moisture will be in the final cheese. So today we're making Pitchfork, so we're cutting the curd quite fine, about the size of a grain of rice or a small pea, because we want to get rid of quite a lot of moisture with the Pitchfork cut. But if we were making Gore with, we'd be cutting it a lot bigger, maybe about the size of your finger, because we want to retain quite a bit more moisture. Another factor that has an impact on the cheese is once we've done the cut, we scald the cheese. And with this we're going to scald it, and with the cheddar we scald it quite high to about 40 degrees, which gets rid of a lot more moisture. Whereas with the Gore with, we scald it to about much less, about 34. Similarly, with the cheddar we scald for 2 hours, but with the Gore with it's only about 1 hour. So all of those factors mean that we'll get a much drier curd with the Pitchfork and a much more moist curd with the Gore with. What I'm doing now is trying to help the cutters. The cutters are doing a good job cutting, but you want to make sure every bit is the same size. So I'm just bringing up other bits from the sides just to make sure everything gets cut to an equal size. And then that will help with ending up with an equal texture in the finished cheese. If you had big bits and small bits, you'd probably get like wet patches and dry patches, and it wouldn't be as consistent in texture. So we've scalded the curds in the vat, and now we've pumped curds and the whey onto the cooling table here, and the whey is gradually draining off through a central channel, and we're left with all the curds. They're a lot more robust now, quite firm and quite squeaky when you taste them, but this is what we want, and then it will lead on to the next process, which is the cheddaring process. We've drained off all the whey. It's all gone down through the central channel of the cooling table. These are really old-fashioned bits of kit that are specially made for cheddar making. They really help with the drainage. So now we're going to begin the cheddaring process. So cheddaring actually is a process within the cheddar making. And so we're going to cut these into blocks, and then we're going to turn these blocks. And that's the beginning of the process. Later on in the process, we'll come back later and we'll see how these blocks have changed. But so this is the first stage. If we were making Gore with today, we wouldn't be doing this. We'd be much more gentle with the curd and cutting it into slices, big slices, and tipping it into the middle, cutting it into like 2-inch cubes. But with this process, we make these blocks, and then we gradually stack them on top of each other. And over the course of a couple of hours, there's quite a transformation, and they become like really big sheets of curd, a bit like chamois leather. So at this stage, it's still quite delicate, and we have to turn them over carefully without tearing them. But later on, these blocks will be cut in half and then stacked on top of each other, 2 high, and then we'll stack them 4 high, and then 8 high, until eventually they become nice big thin sheets.
Last time you saw these, they were looking quite a bit different. It was just at the beginning stages of the cheddaring, and after pretty much 2 hours of stacking and mixing, they're now looking more like sheets rather than blocks. That's a combination of the mechanical action of the weight of the curd pressing down, but also the sheets, as the curd acidifies, the proteins are knitting together a lot more, and you get this wonderful, stretchy, almost like pizza dough. So the curd, it was acidic enough, so we're ready to mill now. And if you look at that, this really is a proper nice thin sheet of cheddar curd. You can see it's almost like a pizza dough. I feel like I should throw it in the air and spin it round. But instead of that, I'm going to hand it to Claire, and she's going to do the proper work of feeding it all through the mill. So you can see the reason we use a peg mill is that these bits, they're not uniform. They're almost torn, and they have thinner edges, fluffy edges. If you use a chip mill, you end up with very uniform, homogeneous lumps of curd, whereas this gives a more traditional texture to your cheddar because the lumps of curd aren't all exactly the same. As it's feeding through, Claire's salting each sheet of curd so that we get an even amount of salt put in throughout the milling process. So once all the sheets have been milled, the fun for Abby and Luke doesn't stop there. They've got about 25 minutes to half an hour of mixing more salt in. All that's doing is just ensuring that we have a really, really even distribution of salt. We could just chuck it all in one go, but then you'd probably end up with really salty bits and some that aren't so salty. By splitting it up like this, it gives us twice as much chance of having it all evenly mixed in. All the salt's been mixed in now, and what we're doing is now trying to cool the curd down. So before we shove it into the tins, having kept the temperature very high all the way through the make up until this stage, we now want to get rid of some of that heat so that when we stuff the tins, it's not too active. We don't want the bacteria to be racing away. We're now getting it ready to go almost into suspended animation for 12 months in the storeroom. So we don't want to put it in really hot. It wants to be cooled down, and so to lose the heat, they're throwing it right up in the air. And the skill is to throw it up, but not throw it out of the vat. And when you're learning, you often find lots of it comes out of the vat, or you just don't throw it up high enough.
So here we are in the Cheddar Store where we keep the Pitchfork Cheddar. We try and keep them in here for at least a year so they get a chance to mature and develop the lovely flavour. When they're older we turn them once a month, but when they're younger we turn them maybe once a week initially. You can see that we try and encourage this lovely rind to develop by keeping the humidity quite high, and the temperature is about 11 degrees in here. So when they're this sort of age, we'll turn them every week, but later on, once a month. You can see that rind developing just here, the kind of speckled rind, which we try and encourage. And as we turn them, we rub them as well to get that rind to spread across the whole cheddar. You can see here on a really young one, that's only about a week old, but you can see you can peel back the cheesecloth, which has been dipped in lard. So we wrap them in those to allow the cheese to breathe whilst it matures. And it will lose a bit of lose moisture throughout that year, but it will gain in intensity of flavour. You need that moisture you need to lose that moisture to get that greater flavour and better texture. We use 4 main starters. This one is one of those. It's MT24. So there we are, nice clean iron, and we'll take it over here, see what we think.
So even though it's not quite the full 12 months, it's still got a nice body, so that means the cheese resists to the tooth as you start to bite it. And the flavour, whilst it's not one of those real punchy kind of supermarket acidic cheddars, because we use raw milk, you have that really nice long finish, that real depth of flavour, and it really gets every taste bud going. You've got that lovely savoury, almost a slightly meaty kind of flavour to it, which I think you only get with this slower style of make that we use, using the raw milk. You really encourage every molecule of flavour from the milk is expressed in the cheese.
Yeah, it's interesting. This cheddar has a really good body. It's a slightly firmer body, and that's because we've been altering the cut size and the scald temperature with the aim of making it a slightly firmer body. It's still really creamy, but it's got a slightly firmer bite to it.
There's a really good balance in there between a firm body there. Yeah, it's still creamy, and we're enjoying the creaminess of this cheddar. And we think that it could be down to the fact that we've got at any one time between 10 and 20 jerseys in the herd. Too many jerseys, and it would be too creamy and it wouldn't be right. But we think that that's a small percentage just gives it a little edge.
The other cheese we make, Gore with Cilli, very different size to the cheddar, and for all you cheesemongers out there, I can't recommend strongly enough, when you give out a taster, or even when you want to taste it yourself, rather than ironing the Cilli, it's really important that you get a cross section of the whole cheese. One of the things that makes the Gore with really special is the 3 distinct layers. So if you can see, you've got that slightly darker band running just beneath the rind. You've got the rind itself, and then you have the centre, the lighter crumbly centre. If I press here, you can see that layer is not just darker, it's actually softer and squishier, and it's actually where the cheese is breaking down, much like a brie or a camembert would ripen and get softer and squishier. The same process is going on, and that's thanks to the moulds that form the rind. They're actually starting to digest the firmer curd of the centre, and that's giving a very different flavour as well as texture to the cheese in the centre. Now, in the centre, you'll get that classic Caerphilly, slightly lactic, slightly more acidic flavour, and with a slightly crumblier texture. So I'm just going to pop the cheese down and chop it. And for cheesemongers, I can't recommend strongly enough that if you ever want to sell a cheese quickly, get some Caerphilly, or make sure it's Gore with, get some Gore with Caerphilly, pop it on sample, and offer pieces like this to your customers. But as they take it, say, stop, don't eat it all in one go, get them to break it into its constituent parts. So if you see there, the centre snaps quite cleanly. It's quite a crumbly, I wouldn't say brittle, but it's certainly not a soft, squishy cheese. Get them to try this piece on its own. With Gore with, we aim for a very subtle crumble, almost like a fluffy crumble, so you don't have those granular lumps that you can sometimes get in mass-produced Caerphillys. The next bit, make sure they try some of the breakdown, that soft, squishy bit. So you can see, as I take that bit, it didn't snap, it kind of squidged, or smushed, if that's a word. The cheese is a lot softer, and straight away it's noticeable that the flavours are different. It's creamy, it's rich. I hate it when people describe cheese like this, but it is slightly cheesier, and that's because the enzymes from the mould in the rind have started to do their job, and they're breaking down the proteins that are forming the structure in the centre, making them shorter, making more proteins, and those are bringing more flavours. And then the rind itself, most people at this point, they'll be looking to chuck it away or kind of hide it in their palm, and as a monger, that's where you can say, stop, eat the rind, pop it in. It has that really nice, something very like you've walked through a forest and you've got the damp leaf litter and the mushrooms are just popping up out of the ground, which is a massive contrast to the cheese in the centre. So you have the light, fresh, lactic, crumbly centre, that rich, creamy layer just beneath the rind, and then the rind itself bringing that earthiness. Bring them all together and it's a stunning cheese.
So we've come to the end of the Mongers movie. We hope you've enjoyed it or found it interesting. If you've any questions or would like to visit the dairy, drop us a line. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.